Well, hello everyone. It is Bedhead Hardy today, and in today's video, we're going to be talking about how car dealers are fed up with their respective automakers. Before we get in this video though, as always, if you want to save time and money the next time you purchase a car, link to my car buying guide in the description down below. And then if you want to see more videos just like this, then I recommend you subscribe because I post content every single day. Let's get into it. So to properly explain why dealerships are so frustrated with their respective manufacturers, we have to look at things through the lens of a car dealer, and we actually have to also go back in time. So just pretend you're a car dealer for a second, and it's just before 2020. And just before 2020 was a relatively normal car market. So with the average dealer, you're going to have to do quite a bit to get a customer to buy from you. So that means that you're discounting most of your inventory, and your respective manufacturer probably has some pretty substantial rebates on your inventory as well to incentivize those customers to buy your brand new product. And so with that brand new product, you're probably not making money on the vehicle itself, but that's completely fine because you are fully intending to make sure that customer leaves with, some accessories on the vehicle and also maybe a warranty as well, so that you can, just make income via different ways. And you also try to focus on selling as many vehicles as you possibly can, because if you just make a little bit of money on each vehicle, then overall you're going to be able to keep the lights on, and you're also going to be able to make a little bit of money for yourself, or in some cases, maybe a bit of money. But 2020 rolls around and your automaker decides to shut down production. And so you go from having tons of inventory, frankly, too much inventory, to having not enough inventory because they're not giving you cars anymore and people are still buying cars. And what then happens is people start buying cars at a faster and faster rate. Now, you don't think that this is going to last forever, so you don't raise your prices right away because, you want to keep your relationship with your customers. But then you start to realize that the manufacturer isn't really ramping up production, and the customers are coming in, they're still buying vehicles at the same rate. And since you're not really raising your prices, well, you're selling fewer vehicles because you have fewer vehicles to sell, and you're not getting newer ones. And so you're going to have to raise your prices if you're going to want to make, the same amount of money that you're making before. And this is obviously exactly what we saw over the course of the end of 2020 and then throughout 2021, and then, somewhat in the beginning of 2022. But you know that this isn't long term, and so what you then start to do once 2022 progresses and you see that buying demand starts to slow down is you pull back on the prices that you put on your vehicles over the last couple of years. So if you had marked stuff up over MSRP, you get rid of those markups and you potentially even start to sell vehicles at under MSRP again. And you think that the market's going to go back to a normal market where you're, again, selling vehicles at significantly under MSRP with some rebates, to where you're probably not making money on the vehicle itself, but you, again, are able to make money via other avenues. However, that's not what happens, because what instead happens is you look at the invoices on these new vehicles that you get in at the dealership, and you see that where you had, maybe 10+% in markup from invoice to MSRP, you now only have maybe 3 to 4%, or potentially even less, maybe even 2%. And so you can't give the discounts that you used to give because you would be losing money if you were to do that. And so now you're in a situation where you're still not getting as many vehicles as you'd like to get. Buying demand has definitely diminished a massive amount. And on top of that, your manufacturer is not letting you make as much money on the vehicles, even if you do the quote unquote right thing and sell those vehicles at the manufacturer's suggested retail price. You don't mark them up at all. And so now you're in a situation where you're trying to figure out exactly what to do. And so now you're kind of back to the mentality where you were at during the beginning of the pandemic, where you're like, I don't have the vehicles that I want. I don't have enough customers currently, and I don't have the profit in the product that I need to be able to sustain the business. And so what am I going to do? Now, I know that was a very strange way to describe the situation that we're currently experiencing, but I think that you guys get the point right now. So with new vehicles, we have seen MSRP increases by 10, 20, sometimes even 30 to 40% on certain vehicles over the last couple of years. But something that you guys don't see because you're consumers and not dealers is that the invoice prices on a lot of vehicles have increased at a rate that is far greater than those MSRP increases. And so if you looked at invoices prior to the pandemic, like I said, a lot of dealers would have, 10, sometimes even more percent in markup between their actual cost in a vehicle versus the MSRP. That is pretty much gone at this point across the board. Like, manufacturers are just slowly, not slowly, but they're very quickly increasing those invoice prices and not increasing MSRPs at the same rate. And the manufacturer's whole mindset behind this is, oh, well, dealerships have been price gouging customers for the last couple of years, and they've been making these huge profits. And, obviously the manufacturers did not benefit with any of these profits that were made, because if a dealership sells a car over MSRP, the dealership gets that extra money. The manufacturer wholesales the cars to the dealers, so they just get the wholesale price for the vehicle. And so that's a big part of the reason why these manufacturers are just elevating these wholesale prices, the invoice prices to the dealers, is because they themselves want to get a little bit of that, well, not a little bit, but a lot of it of that extra money that dealers had been making over the last couple of years. But this is creating a huge issue within the car industry because, well, first off, dealers now don't have as much power over the pricing on vehicles, or rather the discount that they can put on vehicles. Because again, if you look at a vehicle that had a vehicle's invoice prior to the pandemic, well, if a dealership had 10% room between invoice and MSRP, that means that they could give you a 10% discount if the situation made sense for the dealer. Whereas now, when a dealer might not have any room between MSRP and invoice, like there's some vehicles where MSRP and invoice is literally the same price, then they can't discount the vehicle because then they're losing money. And why would a business lose money to sell a product? It just doesn't make any sort of logical sense. And so this is basically stripping away all of the power from the dealers, and it's giving it to the manufacturers. And we're basically getting into a market where the manufacturers, if they keep doing this, they're going to be the ones that determine the pricing for customers. So you're going to be at the mercy of whatever a manufacturer thinks their vehicle should be sold for. You won't be able to, at this point with certain brands, you can't go in and negotiate with the dealerships because of the razor thin margins. There's still, a decent amount of money to be made, but after you pay the salesperson and the rest of the dealership staff and all that other stuff, it ends up, the actual, net profit ends up being pretty minimal on some of these vehicles. Again, there's not going to be any negotiating on that. You're just going to have to wait until the manufacturer decides to release some sort of rebate on the vehicle. And so it's going to definitely create some interesting market dynamics. But I think on the positive side of things, this could be something that some customers like, because it's basically pushing dealers to be more like direct to consumer manufacturers. Because if all of the dealers are selling their product all for the same price, because if they discount the product, they're losing money, then that means that you can go to any dealer and get the same price. You don't have to shop a bunch of dealers to try to get the best price. So I think that that's the silver lining with this situation. But it also has another dark side to it. And that dark side is the fact that because these margins are a lot smaller, some dealers are deciding to go back to marking up vehicles over MSRP again, because that's the only way for them to quote unquote make the profit that they should make on that vehicle. So it's kind of like a catch-22 situation where the manufacturers think that this is going to push dealers to all sell their cars for the same exact price, which is MSRP, and then the manufacturers will discount accordingly based on what's happening in the market. But in reality, this is making dealers extremely frustrated with manufacturers because they can't make the profits that they expect to make off of vehicles to run their operations in the way that they expect. And so they're laying off people. Well, I shouldn't say laying off people. It's more like firing people. And then, on top of that, they're going back to charging over MSRP for a lot of new vehicles because that's the only way that they can make the amount of money that they want to make on them. And then the last thing that I want to touch base on is the fact that car dealers want what you want, and that is lower prices across the board. What you have to remember is that the top of the line number doesn't benefit dealers. And what I mean by this is if a dealership represents a manufacturer and that manufacturer decides to make the product more expensive, that doesn't actually benefit the dealership in a positive way because it makes it harder to sell that product. All dealers care about is what they sell the vehicle for versus what they pay for the vehicle. And so most dealers have the same exact feeling as customers, where these prices have run up way too fast and they're too high at this point, and they need to come down. Manufacturers need to release incentives. They need to do something to stir up the market to get people to come in and buy. And so dealerships want what you want at the end of the day. And, you know, like I've kind of mentioned throughout the video, dealerships also, frankly, want those invoice prices to be more in line with historical norms, because they want to have some level of control over the amount of discount that they put on a vehicle. Because right now, most of the control with a lot of manufacturers or with a lot of dealerships and manufacturers, is in the manufacturer's court at this point. Like, if there's going to be any sort of discount on a vehicle, it's up to the manufacturer to release that discount with the position that they're putting dealerships into. And so the question that I want to ask all of you is, what do you think is an ideal, fix for the situation? Now, I don't want the dumb comments of, we need to go direct to consumer, because that's not practical. The average automaker doesn't have enough money to go direct to consumer like Tesla. The amount of infrastructure that they have to put into place to do that, it's just not there. So with the dealership constraints, whatever you want to call it, what do you think is, a fair play? In my personal opinion, and this is as someone who purchases cars all the time, then happen to work in the car industry and all that, and this is not because I'm paid off by dealers, but I think that what would be ideal is manufacturers to set reasonable MSRP prices that, are obviously affordable considering market conditions. And if market conditions change, then, maybe they increase the MSRP if things get better, where they can have more pricing power. But if market conditions go in the direction that we are seeing right now, then yeah, that's when you want to release some rebates to basically make it so those vehicles are more in line with current conditions. So I think the manufacturers need to be a little bit more reasonable with the pricing, because like I said, with a lot of product right now, the prices have just gotten way out of hand. And then when it comes to the amount of profit margin that they give dealerships, I think that they shouldn't give them like an insane amount, right? Because if you give them way too much, then it kind of creates this whole positive feedback loop where dealers play this game where they just continue to discount the vehicles more and more to beat out their competition. I think that they should have enough markup to where they're able to make a decent amount of money, but not too much to where they're going to play the who can drop the price the lowest, which I know sounds great for the consumer, but it also makes things confusing for the consumer, because then you have a situation where one dealer will sell a vehicle at MSRP, another will be at invoice, another will be somewhat in between and all that kind of stuff. But I think if they find a percentage, and I think it's probably somewhere in that like 6 to 8% range in terms of markup, but whatever percentage it is, where the dealer is going to just charge MSRP, that's it, where it's more direct to consumer sales. Like, I think that's the ideal situation, where the dealership's making some money, the manufacturer is obviously selling the car that they want to sell at roughly the price that they want to sell it at, and then the consumer doesn't have to have a confusing, buying situation where they have to shop a bunch of different dealers to find out which one's the best price, because every dealer is selling that product at MSRP. And I think this is actually pretty fair to say, I think the manufacturer that does the best job with this is Subaru. Obviously, Subaru has a bunch of demand behind their product, but the amount of profit that they give to dealers from MSRP to invoice is not a massive amount, but it's just enough that dealers can, make a profit and make a living. But it's also small enough to where Subaru dealers pretty much never discount their inventory. Like, some inventory they might put some discount on if they've been sitting on it for a while, but that usually doesn't happen with Subarus. But that, I think that's kind of what other manufacturers should do. They should kind of follow suit there. But anyways, let me know what you guys think. This video is too long at this point. I'll see ya.